Pianist Lara Downs, welcome back to Cultural Attaché.
It's lovely to be here.
So, we're going to talk about Rhapsody in Blue for two big reasons. One is the 100th anniversary of the piece, which is February 12th night of this year, having the debut February 12th at Aeolian Hall in 1924 in New York. And you also have today, the day we're speaking, an album out called Rhapsody in Blue Reimagined.
Total
Um,
coincidence.
Total coincidence that it happened to coincide at this time. So clearly you have a passion for Rhapsody in Blue. When did that first develop within you?
So, I mean, I know I'd heard the piece, and I was little, and I have this fuzzy memory of hearing the little bit, the bit you would imagine, used for figure skating in the Olympics. That's kind of one of my earliest memories that I can pinpoint. But I know when I started being interested in playing it, and it was when I was studying in Europe. So I was studying in Vienna. I was in my teens, and when you used to do these piano competitions, there was always a requirement for a piece written after 1920. And I thought it would be fun for me as an American to play an American piece. And I was really interested in the piece. And I was met with like kind of disapproval and almost disdain. Like, that's not serious. There's no way you could play that for a competition. So I taught it to myself.
Did you end up playing it in the competition?
No, 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 no.
What did you play in place of it?
Oh, it was sort of like the second Viennese school was sort of the favored, yeah, favored
That was
area.
the repertoire they
Yeah.
wanted.
Yes. Yeah.
I like the bold choice of Rhapsody in Blue, though.
Yeah. I mean, I think you could do it now. Um, one could do it now, but it just, it made me think. I started questioning or just doing some inquiry about the like where that piece lives and had lived and wants to live. Started way back then, and then my whole journey with American music, so it's brought me to some different understandings than I had back then, for sure.
What do you think most changed about your understanding about Rhapsody in Blue?
Understanding what was happening in Black music at that time in the early part of the 20th century, and therefore what was happening in American music, and all of the things that were coming together and all the things that were changing so fast, and this hybrid language that was developing, which has continued.
It's interesting. That leads nicely into Ethan Iverson's op-ed piece that he wrote for the New York Times, saying that if Rhapsody in Blue is a masterpiece, it might be the worst masterpiece. And I think the crux of it for people who haven't read it is sort of the fact that the promise of Rhapsody in Blue didn't really allow for Black composers to go along with it, and that somehow that is the fault of the music itself. Do you agree with that perspective?
I have I have a different thought, a different understanding of everything that happened in the early part of the century, the last century. Where to start? There are a lot of things. For one thing, I guess I want to say that there have been all along massive problems of inequity in the music world that were institutional. The first opera by a Black composer was done at the Met 2 years ago now. There have been a lot of closed doors and a lot of lots of lack of access. I don't think that sits with the musicians themselves. I think that sits with institutional structures. And I think that what musicians have always done well, I think that what we are best at is listening. And I think that we listen to each other and we learn from each other, and whatever is happening in our air around us, we absorb. We can't help it unless we want to, keep our heads under a rock. So I'm so fascinated with that time. Again, 19 teens and the 1920s and the 30s, things were changing so fast. People were encountering each other for the first time, and everything was new. I mean, jazz was new, and it was a very different thing than it is now. And just even to look at Gershwin's very short lifetime, his 24 years, 25 years until he wrote Rhapsody in Blue, all the things that he's so quickly moving through, but accumulating as he goes, right? The Yiddish theater and vaudeville and the beginnings of, what is the Great American Songbook. it's all coming together. I don't know. I don't put this on the shoulders of musicians.
I think that's a fair assessment because I do believe that you are correct that it's institutional more than anything else. But also we have to acknowledge that there is a long tradition of composers from all parts of the world, from all time periods, who absorb what is around them, what they see, what they hear, what they experience, and that goes into their music.
Yes, absolutely. That's the first thing. And, I think that if we look at, do we want to look at the core tradition of classical music? If we do, then what we're looking at is always this interchange between, not always, but this interchange between structured music and the vernacular, right? The folk music that gets absorbed into the music of Brahms and Liszt and Dvorak and everybody. And so I think it's a continuation of a tradition. And I also like to look at this as omnidirectional. So Gershwin is, he's leaning back, he's looking forward. He's got all of these things kind of pushing and pulling at him. And what he comes up with is very emblematic of its time.
Yes. And for me, one of the greatest pieces of music ever written. I mean, there's a reason I have the neon sign that I do.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, I've loved this piece since I first heard it.
There is a reason that things last. I do think that there's a reason that things last. And I think that what we connect with, whether we know it or not, how everyone always says, oh, every time I hear the piece, it sounds fresh, it sounds new. It doesn't matter how many times I hear it. I think that's true. And I think that we are connecting with this energy of newness that's so present in that music that he's trying. And the reason that I went into this project is because I've always felt that what we're experiencing in his language is an experiment, right? It's an attempt. He's hearing things, he's trying to translate them into a slightly different language. He's trying to capture them and notate them. And, maybe it's not quite gelled. Should it have been?
How much music is fully 100% gelled? I mean, isn't there that old statement that great art is never completed, it's just
Yeah.
abandoned?
Right.
I mean,
Right.
that would apply to Bach as much as it would apply to anybody who's writing music today and everybody in between.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, I'm fascinated by your reimagining um, of Rhapsody in Blue because it comes, you know, on the heels of a lot of people reimagining this work. So before we get into the specifics of what you've chosen to do, why do you think Rhapsody in Blue lends itself to reimagining, which has been done, for decades now?
Yeah. Um, I think honestly, because it exists at that crossroads, right? So if you're at a crossroads, you could go in many directions. And I think that, thank you so much. With this project, we wanted to go backwards and kind of trace the material to its origin source, which meant, if you're going to trace this nascent form of jazz and where is it coming from? Well, pretty quickly you find it's going all the way back to Africa. And that's why, there's this heavy element of these percussion instruments, these bata drums that come from West Africa. But also, I've always cared passionately about the way that Gershwin described this piece as his vision of the musical kaleidoscope of America. And that's a crossroads, and he's living at a crossroads, and that melting pot that he mentions is at a crossroads, like an urgent crossroads. So then to pull the piece forward and trace that melting pot through this last 100 years, I think it's a question of stretching, but in a very authentic way. The stuff is all there. You just get to, pull threads and see where they go.
Right. Earlier this week, I spoke to Leonard Slotkin because he recorded Rhapsody in Blue. It was released 50 years ago this year. So no doubt time to the 50th anniversary of the work. But I asked him why he felt it lent itself. And he goes, if you really look at the composition, it's filled with a lot of cadenzas. And cadenzas are traditionally, opportunities for soloists to do what they want, improv, mix it up a bit. Is that how you see the structure of Rhapsody in Blue as orchestral bits that come in and out for the most part around a bunch of cadenzas?
I mean, I always experience it as a dialogue. I really do. And it's funny. I have a close relationship with the solo piano version of the piece. I play that a lot too. So what that means is that when I play the Grosset version with an orchestra, I have to remember what not to play, right? But I feel very intimately involved with those orchestra bits because I'm used to playing them myself. So I'm not sure that I have an objective view of the structure, but that is something that we wanted to expand and embrace, was the improvisational nature and opportunity. And what you'll hear in this new version is, more of a presence of improvisation, both in the solo sax part and also in those percussion instruments.
Yeah, when I first got exposed to the idea of reworking, reimagining Rhapsody in Blue through Marcus Roberts, because I think his version on Portraits of in Blue is incredible because it incorporates a lot of harmonies and ideas and dissonance, things that Gershwin would never have been exposed
Mm-hmm.
to or never have thought of.
Mm-hmm.
And that prompted me to go back and realize that, well, Billy Strayhorn did an arrangement for Duke Ellington, albeit a
Mm-hmm.
5-minute version, but
Yeah.
I mean, it's Billy Strayhorn and Duke Ellington. That's as good
Yeah.
as it's going to get.
Yeah.
And then to be completely honest, I was driving home from an event a couple of weeks ago, and I heard this different version of Rhapsody in Blue than I had ever heard before. And I couldn't remember whether I was on the jazz station or whether I was on the classical station. And for a moment I was going, "Oh, I wonder if Laura's show is on now and we're getting a preview of this." Only to realize I was on the jazz station and I was hearing Chick Corea.
Oh, how interesting. Yeah.
To know that Chick Corea and this was a live performance that he had done, which, I mean, I live in Echo Park area. I was in Westwood. Um, I dropped somebody off in Venice, drove almost all the way home before the Chick Corea piece was done.
Wow. Yeah.
So it can go. I mean, your version is, I think, 28 minutes or so
Yeah. Yeah.
on the album. Marcus Roberts was about that length. Chick Corea's was over half an hour.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I guess this is a long-winded way of getting to the point that there is a lot to mine within the piece, isn't there?
There is. And also, I think that the further that we've gotten from 1924, as we always do, we have started more and more setting that thing in stone, which it wasn't originally. And when you talk about Ellington and Strayhorn, they're not that far out from, the 20s. And Grofé himself did the version in 24, and then however many versions he did, and what I play when I play the Grofé version with orchestra is from 1942. So when they came to the piece, it was still a new thing. And I think, they looked at Grofé as an arranger, not the composer of the original, authentic word text version of the piece, right? So, and I think that kind of thing becomes more and more important as time goes on. And I guess I feel like, anniversaries, these 100-year anniversaries, it's important not to put things in a museum when they get to be 100 years old.
Well, if we did, we wouldn't have cultural institutions. We would just have more museums.
Yeah. Yeah.
So tell me about your collaboration with Edmar Cologne and how the vision for Rhapsody in Blue Reimagined, as you present it, came to be.
So Edmar and I met, I guess it's 2.5 years ago now. We were both doing a project with the Boston Pops. And it's funny you mentioned Ellington and Strayhorn because the program was built around their music and their relationships. So I was playing a Strayhorn suite that was commissioned for me by the Pops, and there was a lot of Ellington on the program. And it opened with an arrangement that Edmar had done of Caravan, in which he had gone back to the Puerto Rican roots of that piece, brought in a whole section of Afro-Caribbean percussion, and really just, illuminated that aspect of it. And it was beautiful. It was just such a dramatic opening to the concert. And it put all of their other music in this perspective of like making you think about, where is this coming from? And I loved that. And, we'd stayed in touch and gotten to know each other a bit better. But as soon as I thought about this project, I thought of Edmar because, I didn't want to do something cute. I didn't want to do something like, I don't know, this wasn't just for fun. It was really, again, I think because of my close relationship with the Black music of the time, I wanted to look thoughtfully at where these ideas were coming from and where else they connect in my knowledge base, and then where they don't, right? And Edmar has, this whole other world of musical information that when we brought our minds and our ears together, I think we came up with something really broad and beautiful.
Well, how long did it take to come up with what we now get to experience vis-a-vis the recording?
I flew back to Boston last May or June, and we spent a whole day just going through the piano score, we went back to the piano score as our starting point. And, I was just playing and we were kind of brainstorming about, well, what does this sound like? What do you think he was hearing? What have we gotten used to just because we've heard, that the Grofé versions so many times, but what else is possible here? Like, for example, the slow theme over the years, it's developed. I think we generally hear it as this very like Hollywood, lush strings, big, this big sound. And I wanted to think about, well, what happens if we take this theme into a much more intimate place? Because of course, when I play the solo version and I get to play that whole theme, it turns into this, very lyrical, intimate moment. So that was the first step, and we cemented some ideas, and then we have a million emails back and forth because then we both started doing research and we got very nerdy about it, and not just into the music but also into the context, right? The time. That's when I learned everything that I've learned about 1924 in the meantime, and the world in which Gershwin was living, which was important to us. It really informed, I think, the tone and the lens that we wanted to shine on the piece. And then there were some deadlines looming because, we recorded this piece, we performed and recorded it in October. So that's not very much time. And I kept saying, hey, how's the writing going? And Edward kept saying, oh, the writing is the fast part. I need to think about it. And I was like, are you sure? And, and in fact, the writing of it was not lengthy. I think it just kind of came and he had to let it develop and just, take shape.
Well, having a deadline is apropos of the work itself, because Gershwin,
Yes,
he was writing this even though Paul Whiteman had never reached out to him.
right.
Because there was something listed in the paper.
Yeah, yeah,
And that was in January of the same year. I mean, we're talking a matter of weeks to come up with
yes.
Rhapsody in Blue.
Yes, exactly. So that newspaper that you mentioned, that's become really important to me because what I learned, I never went to school. I had to go to normal school. So my grasp of like chronology and history is a little shaky. So when I started investigating 1924, here's what I learned was that in May of that year is when the Johnson-Reed Act was passed, which, shut down Ellis Island, drastically restricted immigration from most parts of the world, and completely changed the reality of Gershwin's melting pot. And so that newspaper, I say this because that newspaper, that story, we know that story about, Ira reading the story in the newspaper and then George has to write the piece. But what else was in that newspaper? That really like shook me. Again, no one's living under a rock here. So presumably in that newspaper, just like, in our time, there are all these stories about this shift that's happening in the country where things are going very much, to a place of restriction. And it was really kind of dark times. And so then I thought, okay, here's this guy and he's asked to write this thing that's called a jazz concerto. And all of this is new. And it's this big concert. And it's, this experiment in modern music. And what is in his head and his environment that is informing this piece? And here he is with this stuff brewing that's really going to actually deny his existence as an American. His parents who just come from exactly the parts of the world that are now being excluded. This is personal. So I don't know. I guess I now experience Rhapsody in Blue almost as, a statement of protest or just whatever, what we do as musicians to like affirm our faith, our hope. I don't think it's a coincidence.
No, and I think that's what makes that elevates the music as well, is bringing that personal, to it. And whether people get what the point is, or what an artist's point of view is with a piece, it's somehow it still seeps in. You can't.
Yeah.
It's inescapable.
Yeah.
One of the things that I like on the commentary track that is on the album is you talk about how this is also your composition as presented on this record is also looking forward. And I'm wondering if you could talk a bit about how this version of Rhapsody in Blue allows us to look forward at some of these same issues that Gershwin may have been addressing back in 1924.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess I just feel that it's almost uncanny, the similarity in these two moments in time, which is always, it's, I don't want to say comforting, it's informative to me, just to understand that history is only cycles. It's always cycles. And I think that the world is so noisy now, and we as artists, we can question ourselves. What are we doing? Are we doing something useful? Is this important? So I think that, digging into this project with this perspective, and especially bringing it to life with an orchestra of young musicians. This was the San Francisco Conservatory Orchestra. These really gifted young musicians who don't have prejudices about this piece, right? They haven't been listening to this piece for 50 years. So all options are possible for them. And to really think intentionally about the melting pot, and both on a macro level and on a micro level within our world of music, where we're really grappling with questions of inclusion and diversity. I think that it gives a new century to the piece. I hope it does. There were some really incredible moments in our rehearsals for this piece where I think all of the musicians felt themselves represented in this work. Whatever your American journey has been to this point, there's something of you now in this piece. And that will continue to be true. One of the things we want to do with this work is wherever it travels into different American communities, we want to be reflecting local traditions too. So in San Francisco, we had an ensemble of traditional Chinese instruments because that story of immigration is so critical to California. And that was really moving. And, as the piece moves on to Austin and Boston and everywhere else, we'll be doing the same, and it'll sound different.
Which keeps it fresh for you as well, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's not just for the audience. Well, what are the plans to tour with this piece?
So we're looking now at performances in the summer and fall of 2024 and far beyond. And a really exciting thing is that in July of this year, we're doing a big outdoor concert in Brooklyn Bridge Park overlooking the Statue of Liberty. And that's in collaboration with WNYC. It's the 100th anniversary of WNYC as well. So we're celebrating this Rhapsody in Blue anniversary, and also, the anniversary of what has made music accessible to the city of New York for 100 years. So that's a big project. And yeah, just, seeing where it's going to go.
As somebody who lives in Los Angeles, I was so hoping you were going to tell me that you were going to be at the Hollywood Bowl.
I mean, let's both work on that. I think, no, I would love that. I would love it. And I think it would be such a beautiful setting. And, there are so many things to illuminate too in this piece that have California roots.
Absolutely. Well, Gershwin spent a huge amount of time here, ultimately, in the second half of his life.
Yeah.
So I think that would be terrific as well. So we've got there's a solo piano version of this, which is the one that I learned back when I was studying music. There is the jazz band version, which is probably closest to what the audience has heard in Alien Hall in 1924. There's a full orchestra version and countless reimaginings of this. What do you think all of this portends for the future of Rhapsody in Blue and how it will be performed and heard?
I think the broader, the better. I think it's an interesting thing that we don't do in the world of classical music very much. There's some of it, but we don't tend to rearrange, reconsider, review, reimagine. I mean, it's really funny for me when I work with musicians from other traditions, and they're like, you do what? You play the same notes the same way over and over again? Why would you do that? But think about, the jazz standards that we love and how many countless times they've been done and in radically different ways. I'm thinking right now for some reason about, name a song that Frank Sinatra sang and Billie Holiday sang. I mean, what could be more different? And yet they both resonate in these profound ways. So the piece has proven itself. I would say the piece has proven itself now, 100 years later. And I would just love to see it continue to grow, because I do think that was Gershwin's intention. I think that those words really speak so strongly to me, this musical kaleidoscope, that speaks to me of endless possibility and shift, right? The way that you look through the kaleidoscope and things keep changing.